Welcome to the Arabesque Scissors YouTube channel. I'm Ali Phillips, and in this video I'll be taking you through how to make the 3 little pockets that are included inside the Creator's Compendium. So you can see that these 2 pockets on this side have a little flap each, and underneath you can see that there's a cute little notched edged feature. So I'll be taking you through how easy this is to do. So there's a couple of things that are important to remember when we get started on these. So because these are quite small, you do need to remember that you need to be quite accurate with your cutting of your template, with your tracing of your template, and with your cutting out of your fabric. So if you're quite careful with these, this will certainly help you get a nice, crisp and even result. And the second thing to remember is that these pockets have interfacing inside of them to give them body and stop them stretching. And so this is really important to make sure that you fuse your interfacing really thoroughly, so that when we're turning these through right side out, that you don't get your layers coming unstuck and getting all sorts of lumpy stuff happening inside. Now, if you love instructional sewing videos that help you grow in your skills as a sewist, please consider hitting that subscribe button and giving this video a like. And if you have any questions or comments or suggestions for future patterns for me, please leave me a comment. So let's get started making these pockets and flaps. So I've got everything cut out here that I need, and I've got my labels clipped on so I can keep track of what's what. So just grab pocket A here, and you're going to need 2 cuts of fabric for the interior and the exterior of this. So just lay them so that they are wrong sides up. Now you might notice that I don't actually have the cutout of the notches on my fabric here, and that's because I'll be using the outline of my interfacing to trace my stitching line with. So just lay out each piece of interfacing and center it on the wrong side of the fabric and fuse that in place. So you can fuse the SF101 right over the top of it directly with the iron. So just make sure you're fusing it really well, and then when you come to fusing the CF 808, you're going to need to do that from the opposite side of the fabric. So just center that there and then flip that over, and then just hit that from the right side of the fabric and give it plenty of steam. So this interfacing likes to fuse with plenty of steam. Just make sure you keep lifting your iron and not sitting it on there for too long at one time, and then just double check that you've actually got it fused, and if you can see that it's coming undone, just keep going, giving it a bit more heat. So sometimes you're going to need to do it for up to about 30 seconds. Now just place pocket A right sides together, lining up those notched edges. So now you can just grab your clips and clip those layers together along all those straight sides, just aligning those edges. So just go ahead and fuse the interfacing onto the wrong side of pocket B. And then you're going to place them right sides together and clip around the edges. So we're going to start sewing on this bottom edge here, leaving an opening here at the bottom and sewing all the way around the top and finishing back at the bottom here. So now you can move on to fusing the interfacing on the remaining pockets and clipping them together, and just make sure that you're fusing that really thoroughly so that it's not going to come undone. So now on these flaps we're going to start stitching on the top straight edge, stitching around this bottom edge and finishing on the other side, leaving a gap in the middle. So now I'm at the sewing machine. I'm going to follow along the edge of that interfacing and trace that really carefully, and when I get to this notched edge I'm just going to follow that really slowly and stop and readjust as often as I need to get that nice and neat. So now move on to the smaller pockets, and you can really use that edge of that interfacing to your advantage. Just go really slowly as you come to the notched edge, and take your time around that. Make sure you backstitch really well so that you don't pull your stitches out as you go around. You might find that you like to use your stiletto tool as you go around here to help hold these layers together. So now move on to sewing the flaps, and just take your time as you go around those curves to stop and readjust if you need to, and that will just help you get a really smooth curve. Now's your chance to press all your interfacing one more time and just make sure you've got everything nice and firmly fused. Now it's time to trim this seam down, but I'm going to leave that long over the opening that I've got there. So just trim that down by about half and just work your way along. Now just really carefully cut out this little notch here. And when you've done that, we're just going to cut some little clips into this notch just to help that spread out a little bit as well. And then you're just going to go around carefully and just clip your corners close to your stitching, but make sure that you're not going to cut through your stitching. Now as you come down to this final side, I'm just going to taper this out as I come to the opening here. And then I'm just going to grab my iron and I'm just going to press each of these seam allowances here back and level with the edge of the interfacing. And then just flip it over and repeat that with the other side of the fabric. So just lining that all up nice and straight. And that's just going to really help you when you turn that through right sides out. That's going to help you have a really nice straight edge to get that nice and neat. So now you can go ahead and trim down all the seams on all the other pockets and flaps and clip your curves and fold back all of your seam allowances. And don't forget to clip just inside the little notches just to help all of that spread out nice and flat. So now you can carefully turn this through the opening that you've got here and turn it right sides out. So just work quite slowly and push really gently so that you're not yanking on the stitches on either side of the opening here. And then just reach in with your point turner or your knitting needle, whatever tool you've got, and just really gently poke out those corners so that they're nice and sharp. And you can also run this tool inside the edge of the seams just to define the curve if you need. And you can roll those seams with your fingers just to bring that nice and crisply up to the edge there. And then just check that you think that that's got a nice straight edge along the top. And then you can just hit that with the iron and give that a really good press into shape. Now just go ahead and turn all of your pockets and flaps right side out, using your point turner to smooth out those points and even out the curves, and giving everything a good press at the end so that everything's nice and flat and straight. So now you can top stitch around each of the curved edges of these flaps, add an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and each of the straight notched edges of the pockets. Stitching, add an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So now we've got these all nicely top stitched, we can just stack them up and set them aside until we're ready to sew them on. So now I'm going to show you how to fit your elastic to the pen that you'd like to have inside your cover. So I've got two different pens here that are different thicknesses, and I'm going to just take this little piece of elastic and fold it around one of them, and you can just decide how tightly you'd like it to fit. So just grab your marker and just slide that up and down a little bit just to work out how loosely, because you do want it to sort of be a little bit loose. You want to be able to get it in and out fairly easily, but not to have it super floppy. So decide the thickness of pen that you're most likely to use, wrap that around, and then just place a mark on both sides like so. And that's going to be your stitching line and help you have it fit your pen the way that you'd like. Now just grab your ruler and you're going to add 3/8 of an inch to each of those marks that you've made. And then just trim off any excess that you might have overhanging past that line. And now just clip that back together and you can take it to the sewing machine. Now grab your fabric pen holder and you'll notice that it's cut on the bias to give it extra stretch as you take your pen in and out. So just fold it right sides together and match those short ends together. We're ready to stitch that on the sewing machine. So I'd like to share my little trick that I have for keeping these two layers of elastic perfectly aligned, because one of the problems that often happens when you sew something slippery like this is that one side will often push forward and you'll end up with the edges misaligned. So I like to start with the two layers perfectly aligned and just slide it underneath the machine, keeping those layers nicely together. And then I don't start sewing right on the edge, I actually hand crank my needle down through those layers, about 1/3 of the way in, and just lock them both together. And then you can start sewing forwards and back stitch and go forwards, and you'll discover that your two layers are going to be perfectly lined up, and you won't have to worry about one of them being slightly skewy. So you take this seam on this fabric pen holder and open it out with your fingers, and just give it a really good press with your fingers so that the seam is now sitting nice and open. And then just turn that through to the right side, and keeping that seam centered in the middle of that tube, just grab your iron and give it a really good press. And now we're going to fit this pen holder to the pen. So I've designed this to fit at the bottom of the pen holder and just prevent it from swinging around when it's inside the cover. So I want mine to be a little bit baggier than the elastic. So just measure your pen and work out how baggy that you'd like yours to be. And then grab your pen and just put a mark at the mark that you'd like, and flip it over and put a second mark. Now I'm going to add 3/8 of an inch onto each side of those marks. So just measure with your ruler and mark an extra 3/8 onto each side of that. And if you'd like to get a nice straight edge, you can just rule down that line with your ruler. And now you can just trim off both of those extra edges along those lines. Now just fold that right sides together with the seam inside, and you can take it to the sewing machine. Now I'm just going to use my stiletto to hold these layers together. Because this is a bias piece, it is going to stretch a little bit, so I like to use my stiletto to just pull and manipulate these layers so that they stay nicely together. And just sew slowly along this, just using that stiletto to hold everything together. And by a nice happy accident, I have a little mushroom right there on that pen holder. So now you can just clip the labels back onto each of these pen holders and set them aside until we're ready to use them later on.